Hello and welcome to Northeast Tonight, the show that decodes the region. I am Wasbir Hussain. As science and technology progresses at breakneck speed, the conservation versus development debate too gets pulled in different directions. If we are to focus on Northeast India, several parts of which are biodiversity hotspots, we see two contrasting pictures. We see huge conservation success stories and efforts to protect the one-horned rhinos in Kaziranga is an example, and we see massive destruction of habitat that has left wild Asiatic elephants come out of their jungle abodes and plunder croplands and kill humans and also face retaliation by humans on many occasions. The man-elephant conflict appears to be going out of control. Concerns over lack of a proper mechanism to deal with issues concerning innumerable transboundary rivers that exist also is a problem. This is also adding to the ecological woes like flooding, siltation, resultant impact on agriculture, of course, is just an issue. To discuss these and more, I have a fascinating set of people in the studios today who have come to Guwahati, who are in Guwahati to attend the 7th Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum, the flagship calendar event of Balipada Foundation, a leading conservation group. The broad theme of this year's event is Rural Futures, Nature Capitals Towards Universal Basic Assets. Well, I have in the studios with me Mr. Venice Martin, the current co-chairman of IUCN Wilderness Specialist Group, someone who has been working to bridge the gap between human beings and nature. Also with me is Dr. Anish Andheria, a top carnivore biologist who specializes in predator-prey relationships. Also, I have, of course, Dr. Anish is a motivational speaker as well. I have also in the studios Professor Xiancho Chu, who is from the top botanist in China, who is from the Kunming Institute of Botany and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And I also have with me Dr. Mohammad Zabed Hussain, a professor in Dhaka University who works on environmental biology, among other things. So this is a real fascinating group of people in my studios today. Welcome, gentlemen. First, let me go to you, Mr. Venice Martin. You know, it's an interesting, we are talking about the development versus conservation debate. Can you give a broad picture what this debate means to you in 21st century when development seems to be the catchword? Every country, whether developing or developed, talks about development.
I'm very happy to, because I think the conservation development debate really has a false center to it. And that false center is, if you do conservation, you don't have jobs. You lose jobs. And this is the argument used against conservation all the time. There is no better place than India to show the world how conservation can create jobs. There is not so much in the Northeast, a little bit, but throughout India, tremendous amounts of wasted land that's been ruined through bad farming practices, bad logging practices, and we need to fight climate change, and we need to save water. So what happens? Put people to work rewilding that land, trees, shrubs, biodiversity, pulls down the carbon, creates jobs.
Absolutely. So this is the challenge. Create jobs at the same time conserve the environment. Professor Xiancho Chu, you are from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Of course, you are from the Kunming Institute of Botany. My question is, you know, in a populous country like China, how are you managing this issue, development versus conservation? What are some of the key highlights in your view?
I think firstly, as a human, we have to define development goal. What kind of Earth planet you want? If you want clean air, you fresh water, you need good food, you need good habitat. So that's the ultimate goal for as a human. Then look at our nature, how we use the tree.
Right.
You can cut the tree for burning it. You can cut the tree and for cooking. But also you can use tree for orchid, and you can use tree for medicinal plant management. So it's different purpose. Also, we have a tremendous development option how to use the forest, how to use our motherland.
Absolutely. Yeah. So these are only the opening remarks. I'm coming to you once again, Professor Shu. Let me go to Dr. Anish Andheria. Anish, you see, let me give you an example of Assam. You are working on a very interesting subject. You are specialized in predator-prey relationships. And obviously, the biggest predator are humans. And I don't know whether you mean humans when you talk about predator-prey. My question is, let me give you an example of Assam. Assam has a large population of wild Asiatic elephants, Asiatic wild elephants. 7,000-8,000 is the estimated population. They crisscross between Assam jungles and the adjoining jungles of Bhutan. The question is, every day, hordes of these elephants, these jumbos, come out of their habitat. They're plundering croplands. They are feasting on local beer, rice beer, which the local people make, tribal people make in certain parts of the state. And they are absolutely berserk in the process. It is not that they are only plundering humans. They are also at the receiving end. So how do you describe this situation?
So the Asian elephant, or elephants in general, are the largest land mammals. And obviously, because of the size and the way they use their habitat, they are at loggerheads with human beings who are actually collectively a much larger mammal and a consumer of natural resources than elephants are, which means human beings and elephants compete with each other. And in a country where 1.3 billion people live, obviously land is at a premium. Elephants who have been here for many million years more than we have are now facing the brunt of what we have done to our environment. Now, talking about Assam. Assam is one of the better states when it comes to protection of forests. In fact, the whole of Northeast, all these states are much more greener than other parts of India. However, if you look at the recent past, in Assam, for instance, Assam has 35% of its land under forest.
Yeah.
However, nearly 50% of that is degraded, which means it is classified as forest, but when you go down there, it's not actually, doesn't look like forest anymore. Now, when you say a forest is degraded, what it does is it is removing those natural resources which are consumed by large mammals like elephants, which are eaten by deer, and then subsequently deers are consumed by tigers. So when you deplete forest, when the habitat gets reduced, obviously those animals, especially elephants who live for long periods, will come out in search of food. Now, human beings, once they degrade, on the periphery, they have agriculture fields which are growing paddy, and so that is like baiting animals. So when you grow sugarcane, paddy, or any other crop in a season which is dry because of irrigation facilities, you suddenly have a very nutritive food. Obviously, when animals are deprived in the jungle,
so at the end of the day,
out.
yes, Dr. Anish, at the end of the day, it is the loss of habitat that is forcing animals like elephants to come out of their abodes and into towns and cities and attack human beings, destroy croplands, in the process also get attacked by angry villagers. So that is the situation prevailing in Assam, as we have just shown some of the visuals. Let me come to you, Professor Javed Hussain from Dhaka University. Professor Javed Hussain, Bangladesh is also a very populous country. I mean, when we talk about the development versus conservation debate, conservation not just means wildlife, wild animals. Conservation also means conservation of the ecosystem, conservation of forest, conservation of the climate, so on and so forth. Now, we are part of the great Asian mega delta, Bangladesh, Assam, Northeast India, of course. So, what are the steps that your government is taking, because we have seen huge amount of floods, that is the scene in Assam as well, and once the floods recede, the entire croplands are covered with tons and tons of silt and making the place unfit for agricultural production, agricultural cultivation. So this is a huge problem, apart from, of course, erosion of land being eaten away by rivers in floods. Javed.
Thank you so much, Wasbir, for inviting me to here. You have rightly pointed out the situation of Bangladesh. This is a very densely populated country, but we have tremendous demand of development, right? Urbanization, then industrialization, and then construction of roads, highways, buildings, bridge culverts, and so many things. First of all, we have to fulfill the demand of the construction of the people. At the same time, we also have to
Right.
conserve our natural ecosystem and biodiversity, and our forest coverage, natural vegetation is only 11%. So, since our population is tremendously high,
Yeah.
so we cannot increase our vegetation, increase our forest. But what we can do is just preserve our natural vegetation right now and increase the plantation. That is plantation by human being. That is artificial plantation, and we can do this through the roadside highway and,
Right.
and homestead plantation.
Now,
like
my
this.
question, that brings me to the question, Professor Vance Martin, you have been working around the world. My question is, can countries deal with this situation on their own, or do you think international cooperation is necessary, if not at global scale, but at least at a regional scale? See, we are talking only about trade blocks, business blocks, so on and so forth. We talk about, if we are in Guwahati, northeastern India, we talk about ASEAN, we talk about SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. But, we in these forums, we only talk about development, trade, business. But nobody is talking really hard about issues on conservation. My question is simple. Can countries deal with their conservation efforts and battle this whole fight for space between development and conservation alone, or do you think cooperation will help?
No, definitely. Me?
No, I'm asking
Okay,
Professor Martin.
Yeah, sure.
Transboundary cooperation is essential because nature has its own boundaries.
Yeah.
And they're called watersheds and they're called
Yeah.
mountain ranges.
Right.
So number one, transboundary cooperation is absolutely essential. And number two, it's being done more and more. I'm very active in the Peace Parks Foundation in Africa, working across boundaries, creating large protected areas, helping local villagers. When you cooperate, everybody gains. And when you cooperate for nature, the whole world gains.
When you cooperate for nature, the whole world gains. That is very, very interesting. Today's newspapers in India, we are getting these headlines saying that, climate change, the contribution by the countries are so less that it is not going to impact better the situation. If any of you have written that, you know what I am talking about. Let me turn once again to Professor Sianso Chu. Basically, talking about protecting the rivers, river systems. Now we are neighbors. China and Northeast India, we are absolute neighbors. There are 11 major rivers coming out of the upper reaches of China into different countries in the lower riparian. But there is no agreement. There is no water agreement between the two countries, or there is no water agreement between most countries in the world today. Now there is a feeling that being in the upper reaches, a country like China can control all the rivers, and the lower riparians are facing danger. They can control the rivers. There are a lot of dams being built. So these are some of the fears. And when you release a lot of water, and as I said, it can have a severe disastrous impact on the ecology in both India and Bangladesh, in both Northeast India and Bangladesh. These are some of the fears. These are some of the apprehensions of the people here. So how do you explain and what should be done? Is cooperation the key?
First, I think the rivers are symbolic, and of course, China sitting upstream, and India, Bangladesh is sitting the downstream, and it's upstream, downstream linkage, and we need a regional cooperation. That's no doubt. But of course, it's where unsolved issues like border dispute and then so river becomes second. That's not true. So now look at China, India. We already have agreement sharing the data for regional flood forecasting. Now all downstream countries have access to Chinese real-time data system. So that's a very essential. That's also put the disaster management as top priority in this development as second, and of course, conservation will follow.
Okay. So data sharing is already there between the two countries, so that is a huge step forward. We hope that is translated into real-time action. Anish, Javed Hussain was talking about Bangladesh having only 11% forest cover, but apparently we need 30% plus forest cover to have a pretty comfortable situation. 33%, that is the figures we are told is what we need in India considering its population, but we now have only 20% forest cover. Now, do you think this reduction in the habitat, the loss of habitat, do you think we can make it up? Is it a simple thing? Can we make it up with plantation? Is it the way out? What is the way out really?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, especially because now we know that internationally a lot of countries have come together and are talking about large scale plantations of more than trillion plants, so and trees rather than. But so coming back to the context now, when you talk of India and we say nearly 21% of India is forest, which means 1/5 of India is forest. And obviously the need is about 33%, 1/3 of India should be forest if India is to be stable. Now that's on paper. However, if you really go down to those forests, and as I spoke about Assam where there is degradation,
yeah.
Across the country there is degradation. There is no state which has become net positive in terms of forest cover over the past decade. There is increase in forest cover shown in certain data sets, but that is largely contributed by a lot of plantations that are happening. Now the solution and what you are saying, can plantations change it? My answer to that is plantation cannot regenerate forests. Plantations can only make gardens. So human beings on their own can create gardens. And what is the difference between a forest and a monoculture garden? Which means if you plant one species of tree in 1,000 hectares from a satellite, it will look like green forest. However, the ecosystem services,
I will come to Professor Sianshu to talk on this little later. But first I'll go to Professor Javed Hussain. Bangladesh, the amount of land being eaten up by rivers during the flood season, is it impacting on the agriculture? Because at the end of the day, Bangladesh is also developing very, very fast, quote unquote. I'm using the word developing within quotes because there are these land sharks who are occupying and grabbing a lot of lands and giving it to developers, building multi-story buildings and so on, when large parts in the rural Bangladesh, the area is being washed away, eaten up by flood waters. So this is a serious problem. Like in several parts of Assam, this is a serious problem. How do you look at this as a geologist, as someone who is into a different form of geology? How do you look at it?
Yeah, sure. You have pointed it very rightly. It is actually problem at this because this is due to the siltation. River depth is decreasing. That means flood is becoming more frequent, and in the rural areas it is happening. But in some parts there is also shortage of water. Compared to like 20 years back or 25 years back, even 15 years back, rivers actually don't get water from the upstream, and maybe that is related to the use of water in the upstream and also due to climate change. So these are the factors. So actually, from my experience, I have seen that even 20 years ago, some parts of the country was flooded, but now those are not flooded,
right.
And in some parts of the country, these are more frequently flooded. So, the dimension of this flood effect changed. Some parts are not getting water, but some parts are getting more water, like in northern part of Bangladesh and also in the northeastern part, they face more frequent floods, and that is problem with the rural agricultural farmers.
So, Professor Su, basically what we are recently talking about is whether agriculture holds the key in countries like India. where 50% of the population is into farming or more. These are some of the figures vary. And people are saying that, okay, no, it's a vast country, 1.3 billion population and increasing. So modern industrial scale agriculture is necessary, not community based agriculture will not help, that will be too small scale. So you need industrial scale agriculture. This is one lobby, this is one thought, but a lot of people are against industrial scale farming. Can you give an example, contrast it with the situation in China?
I mean, China, what I'm promote is a circular agriculture. So what your output from agricultural system, now besides you harvest rice, now you burn the rice straw. If we put the rice straw into silage system, we develop fodder and the bioenergy, but also very important what we do use the innovation to put into mushroom substrate. So we have industrial level of a mushroom factory, which need a lot of biomass instead of just burning it, become air pollution. So circular agriculture, that's the way for future agriculture in the region to feed the large population like China, India, and Bangladesh.
So are you in favor, are you saying that you are in favor of industrial scale agricultural production?
We need to make small scale, medium scale, and the industrial scale.
So
all work together.
All should work together and
yes.
complement and supplement each other. Professor Martin, you know, this is a very important debate at certain informed levels in India, whether there should be community-based farming, you know, should continue, and whether there should be industrial scale farming. For example, in large parts of Africa, it is the people who know their land, and whether the big industrial companies or corporations which are going to do agriculture there have failed in many cases. What is your experience? What do you have to say?
No, regardless of the scale, the one thing that's important is to do it organically. Build the soil, build the health in the soil, you will build the health in humans. And you can do that at a large scale or a small scale. I'm myself particularly a proponent of local agriculture, so you don't have to move food long distances. 1/3 of the food produced in this world is wasted. So that's one of the byproducts of industrial scale that we can eliminate by going local. But more than anything else, go organic.
Okay. I'll go for a break, but before that, very quickly, the same question to you, Anis.
So, first of all, I feel that, and to get the figures right, I think about 65% of Indians
are into farming,
are agrarian.
I stand corrected.
And many of these are living in extremely remote areas, and their agricultural holdings are less than 2 hectares. About 85% of all farmers have less than 2 hectares. And people think that farming is inefficient. And currently it's true because we don't have surface water much enough. And so they are going down and getting the water out from the earth's crust, which is through solar pumps and all those things that are being given as subsidies. What that is doing is on one end, such kind of farming which is inefficient is depleting the water resource. As long as the rivers were flowing, it was okay. Now that we are getting those ancient waters out, which are not going to be replenished again, there is a big issue. And so what we need to do is, I think the win-win for both farmers and forest is to regrow forests on community land.
Okay, regrow forest on community lands.
But that forest timber can be used by the farmers so that you can even burn that, but if it is on your land, then it is zero net negative impact on nature.
All right, that's a very interesting way forward. Perhaps we have to work, debate and confer on that a lot. On that note, I go for a short break. Stay on, don't go away. I'll be right back after this short commercial. Welcome back. I am in the middle of this very interesting development versus conservation debate with a group of panelists from home and abroad. Very, very fascinating people indeed. Very, very fascinating observations and comments. I'd like to come to you, Professor Hsien-So Soo. You know, we are talking about growing new forest. We're talking about agriculture. We have also talked about whether there should be, agriculture, there should be industrial scale farming, so on and so forth. We have talked a lot on these issues. Now, the question is our food system. What is our food system, quantity of our food source? I was reading a very interesting case study that said that, no crop can grow without pollinators. You are a botanist, so I am asking you this question. Now, there was this assessment review in the journal Nature, which has come out that in United States alone, every year, the bees, the insect bees alone provide service. If you have to quantify the service provided by the bees in pest control, it is up to $240 billion US per year. The service provided by the insect bees in pest control. $240 billion US is the estimate. This is an article published in the Nature magazine, Nature journal. Now, modern genetically modified crops are unfriendly to bees. Now, this is what is happening. This is what is technology, spread of technology and development is seeing. We are seeing a lot of genetically modified seeds being used to, grow several items by people. These are done by the multinational corporations, and these are impacting on the bees, and there is just no bees around. So, what's going on? As a botanist, are you worried, man? How do you look at it?
If we talk about the ecosystem, we're always talking about its 5 pillars. Start with the plants, then insects, wildlife, and fungi and the microbiome. 5 pillars are interlinked, interconnected. So that's very important. Bees are a particular example. So if we don't have good pollination, and so agriculture, that's no harvest. So bees are very important, but also the bee need food. So the food is from the flowers. So if we design a agroforestry system which allowed to have a different source of flowers, feed the bee, and the bee can also feed the agricultural crop, particularly the fruit trees.
Yeah.
So we get the ecosystem work. So we need to design the landscape with natural habitat and also the human modified.
But will the big multinational corporations, will the corporate world allow you to do that? That is the big question.
Okay, then we need to look at the value chain. So if we put high price for honeybee, which from the agroforestry system, from the nature, for instance, in this region, we very famous Himalaya cliff bee. The honey collected from cliff, from wild honey, and from nature. If we put a high value, promote this kind of bee, this bee, by the way, pollinate more than 1,000 species.
Okay, I think people have to think about that, doing that, getting these particular species. Professor Vance Martin, do you see a future where we'll have a robotic bees and people will say, oh, what great technology, great development taking place in the world? Or do you think, or would you like to describe such people as lunatics?
Yes. I think the technology serves us very, very well. It's not the answer, though. The answer for a successful future of humans on planet Earth is a relationship with nature that is respectful and that is plentiful, so that there's enough nature so that nature can support us.
Okay, Anis, robotic bees. Well, robots, you'll be playing with this thing. Bees will come from one place and pollination going on. So, you think that is possible?
So this is the same thing like how they were to send mirrors up in space so that it can reflect back sun's rays. So what you had to only do is not allow the forest to get degraded or bring the forest back. Now, so when it comes to bees, 1/3 of all our crops which we are consuming for protein and other important vital chemicals, nutrients, come because of bees. So like watermelon to alfalfa, all of these are dependent on bees. So if you have pesticides going into the ecosystem, you have forests that are going down, you have cities that are killing bees because they come up on, because they have no other place to go, you will have bees in big skyscrapers and that they are burned. What you are doing is not only destroying your agricultural produce
Yeah.
by 1/3, but you are also killing all those natural forests, because bees are pollinating, mind you, all the forests.
So, when you work on predator-prey relationships, predator-prey issues, the biggest predator is humans. that
Yes,
means.
true. And by the way, this is when I say predator-prey relationship, it is in an ecosystem. There is a balance. So no animal has more power than the other, which means in a jungle we may think tigers are more powerful, but deer outnumber tigers by 500 to 1, which means what meets the eye is not what the reality is. But in the case of human as a predator, we pretty much swallow everything that we touch. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a friend of mine who is also a geologist, and we said that, don't you think we are like acid? Whatever we touch, we burn. And so there, yes, we are a predator, but not the kind of efficient predators that the tigers are, because tigers only get 10% of the standing biomass. The remaining 90% is allowed to breed, and that is true even for sharks. That is true for all other mammals in the sea.
Humans are predators, but not efficient predators. So, viewers, we are predators, but not efficient predators. That's what I am not saying that. That is what Dr. Anish and Heria is saying. That. Let me turn to Javed Hussain. Javed, for example, when we talk about, people in India would say, conservation is very important, but development is necessary because we want jobs, we want money, we want this and that. Now, let me give you a figure. The density of population per square kilometer in India is 400. In the United States, it is just 35, and in China, it is about 140. That is the density per square kilometer population. India is 400. That is a serious issue. That's a huge problem. And Bangladesh also, the density of population is very high. Now, when people say that conservation is important, but development is a must, how do you answer, how do you respond, how do you explain to such people, such arguments?
Yeah, Wasbir, you have pointed that very rightly. I should say, although you have not mentioned the density of Bangladesh, you have mentioned that the population density of USA and India. In Bangladesh, the density is per square kilometer is around 1,200. That is
1,200.
Yeah, that is around 1,200.
So that is a magnanimous. It's a problem of huge magnitude.
Yeah. So in my earlier, I have already said that since population density is very high, and at the same time we have a tremendous demand of our development activities and development works. So people know, and even nowadays people think that biodiversity should be conserved, natural ecosystem should be conserved, but the challenge is how to conserve those things. Even small thing, if industrialist or other, even government wants to do something in somewhere, people are so aware that they first come forward and say, oh, don't disturb this ecosystem and don't do anything that is not good for biodiversity. So such kind of people are now in our country. So what we have to do is that we should preserve our natural resources and our natural habitats as it is. At the same time, as I have already said, that we should increase some plantation activities.
Plantation activities is, you are focusing repeatedly on plantation activities, that might hold the key. Professor Vance Martin, where should the buck stop? In this whole development versus conservation discourse, where does the buck really stop? Who wins at the end of the day, or who should win?
Who won't win if we keep destroying nature is human beings. Let's get that straight. Because it's wild nature that actually makes life possible on Earth. End of story. We don't want an end of story, but that's the end of the story right there. And if we don't pay attention to that, then human beings will suffer. These things, I'll use some jargon, ecological services. Let's take that jargon away and say nature provides life support. The more we destroy nature, the more we take ourselves off of the life support, and we will suffer.
Absolutely. Now, let me give you another example from Assam and other parts. It might be the situation elsewhere. We have got a bird called hargilla, which are basically vultures. Now, suddenly you find scores of vultures dead. Vulture is not particularly a very fascinating bird, but it's a very important bird as we all know. Now, diclofenac was used as a very cheap drug used mostly in the 1990s to treat livestock and so on. And these vultures who feed on carcasses that were treated with diclofenac, they eat on these carcasses, they feast on these carcasses and they die. Now, what is happening in the process? We have a huge amount of livestock, our natural cleaners are just not there, they are vanishing from the face of the earth. We have a home to 500 million livestock with no vulture around. The population of feral dogs have shot up to 18 million. So these are figures which can be contested. We are not debating on the figures. These are figures which I have picked up. Now, what is the situation? Because there is technology, there is cheap technology, there are cheap drugs, there are costly drugs. People use them in developing countries. People don't have much to spend. So these are some of the issues.
So you want me to take it?
Yeah.
Okay. So first I will talk about the development versus conservation part, and then I'll come to the vultures, because I think I don't think that there is any debate between development and conservation. I come from a conservation fraternity,
yeah,
and none of our meetings, our closed door meetings, are held where we say that we don't want development, because all of us in the 21st century, we need certain things. If we have to travel, as I'm talking to you, I wouldn't have taken a flight, I wouldn't have been here and got this opportunity to talk to these people there. So development is not at loggerheads with conservation. Conservation done correctly will only help us to develop in an energy efficient way in a planet which has 7+ billion people, which is already overpopulated. Bangladesh density or any density you talk, we are more number of people than what was needed, probably by 3 times. So the only way we can do it is to secure our natural capital. Let me say that we have what we all understand is the financial capital, that is the money,
yeah,
the GDP and all that. And what we have in India and Bangladesh and China is social capital, which means intellectual power and the number of people, human resource. We have physical capital, which means our houses, our whatever we're using. But all these 3 are directly dependent on natural capital. So you cannot deplete natural capital and hope that social capital, physical capital and financial capital will ever go up. So I would say natural capital comes first. If that is secured, we can build on it. So which means development can happen with our own money. So India will not have to borrow money from the West to develop. We will have our own money if we depend on our own ecosystems and protect them.
Now, Professor Su, community involvement in development and communities' involvement in conservation. So, the people, the communities and the people sacrifice for development as well. When there is a huge project coming, when there is a dam coming, a lot of people are uprooted, they are displaced and put in some other places. At the end of the day, when you do a conservation effort, then also there are a lot of restrictions on the communities. So do you think that people are at the receiving end of both sides, both these programs, whether it is development, whether it is conservation?
And I always try, we always try to put a dichotomy conservation and development. I like to say development is about conservation and vice versa. For instance, if we put a dam there, if we put a city there, if you have good conservation view, you can design how to let the fish pass, and then how to design city was eco-friendly, not only about the climate change, but also you put the habitat for birds, for pollinator, for predator. So everything what you're doing, you need a conservation mindset. So
yeah,
that's very important. Sometimes don't look at the conservation as a burden. We look at the conservation also as development. That's you can create a job, you can do technical innovation, allowed to selling high-end products to middle class. So conservation is also about development. So it's integration today with the technology, with our mindset, we can do better than before.
So Javed Hussain, Professor Chu is basically what he is trying to say is that, what he's saying is that there is conservation and development are not really at loggerheads. they can complement and supplement each other. Do you agree with this view, or do you have a different view?
Yeah, I completely agree with Professor Shaw. And you know, right now, these days, it is said that conservation or biodiversity should be mainstreamed with the development activities. Therefore, I should say that actually there should not be versus between development and conservation. I think conservation is for development, development is for conservation. I think there should be no
Okay,
debate between.
but Professor Vance Martin, is it easier said than done that conservation should be for development and development should be for conservation? That is the ideal utopian situation.
We're dealing with human beings. Many people in the development world, they make money from large-scale development. We need leadership that shows that development is very important, but let's develop our real infrastructure that supports us. There's roads, there's dams and all that. How about the green infrastructure, the forests, the rivers? We need to invest in that, and leadership can do that. And I believe that it's a lack of political will, certainly lack of vision, and of course in the end there's greed and corruption. And that's in all countries.
So that's a very, very, I think he has hit the bullseye, Professor Vance Martin. Dr. Anis, you know, when we're talking about lack of political will, and what he says that if there is will shown by the political leadership, things can change on the ground. Now my question is, you know, for the first time in independent India, we have a government, most of whose leaders are not educated, perhaps in Harvard, Stanford, Cambridge, and not brainwashed by IMF and World Bank. You know, they are a set of homegrown, home-educated politicians. I'm talking about the present government, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, is it enough to expect them to understand the situation better?
Well,
what is your thinking?
I think politicians have a role to play, but politicians all over the world are dependent on scientists to give them inputs. Modi ji doesn't have to understand how the river systems and the forests are linked or what they will do. All they have to do is open up to good quality science, which means in all their committees that they are being advised, they need to have people who have a balanced approach, not either or. So river linking, for instance, is a death knell for river systems. You cannot, every river has a different character. You can't say there is surplus water. One thing that everybody must understand, that there is no word like surplus water. All water that ends up in the sea from the river is important for maintaining life in the sea.
Right.
And no other profession or no other livelihood option on earth supports more families than the sea. And so, when you talk of all these things, they only happen because the advisory committee is thinking in one direction, and India, and therefore there is an opportunity. We should not ape the West. We should create our homegrown technologies. There is enough knowledge with our communities. There is enough knowledge in doing things in small sectors. There is enough knowledge and resilience in people in India, because if Indians were 1.3 billion, and if they didn't know what to do, we wouldn't have had 75% of all tigers, 75% of all Asian elephants, 85% of all one-horned rhinos, and 100% of Asiatic lions. Every other country on earth have lost large mammals because they are viewed as something at loggerhead with nature. So last thing is, therefore, what I feel is India's opportunity in the next 20 years, India can be the showcase for the world if we take the energy efficient pathway, and that is possible. Decentralizing power, decentralizing water, decentralizing food.
Right. I am running short of time. Last comments from Professor Su. India and China, total comprising roughly about 3 billion people. Do you think if you unite on common issues that saves planet Earth, we can dictate terms to the whole world? Do you agree?
Yes. That's the way we can make change. Now, this trip, I particularly like to talk about China-India collaboration on climate change, from agricultural practice to conservation practice, and also equally important also for development practice.
Okay, let us hope India and China unites on more issues concerning the safety and security of planet Earth and all those who live on planet Earth. We hope that happens. Professor Javed Hussain, your final comments.
Yeah, I think yes, collaboration not only between China and India, but other countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and other countries, Bhutan. Yeah, these countries should also be included in the whole approach. We should think about the whole thing as a single, like a single ecosystem. I should say.
Okay, Professor Martin, united we stand, divided we fall. Is that the message coming out?
The message is we can't destroy nature without destroying ourselves.
We can't destroy nature without destroying ourselves. So what are the three things that the world needs to do today?
Number one is stop destroying the few large wild ecosystems that we still have, land and sea, because that supports us.
Yeah.
It draws down carbon, it produces services, it's life, it's life. That's number one. Number two is respect the traditional communities around the world who have always had a type of knowledge that we lack in our modern world. Number three is accept good science, put good science together with traditional knowledge. Saving nature saves people.
Okay. Dr. Anis Andheria, last words to you.
Well, I would say we need to be respectful of all life on earth, starting from the butterfly that you see every morning to the tiger that actually is responsible for the water in the paddy fields that we irrigate. And so I think the last thing is that India is positioned to be the world leader in balancing conservation and development, and there is enough and more examples here. So we need to educate the communities so that they understand the bigger picture, and we will have a workforce straight away that will be self-reliant, and there will be reverse migrations, which means this is the only country where you will have people moving from big, large mammoths, inefficient cities into efficient lifestyles closer to where they belong.
All right. I think that has been a very fascinating discussion. 2-3 points that have emerged from this discussion. One, there has to be political will in all attempts and every attempt to save planet Earth. And secondly, the communities hold the key. Communities need to be made aware. And at the end of the day, it is not everything mega that holds the key. At the end of this fascinating discussion, I have to end. And on this note, I end this edition of Northeast Tonight. I thank all my panelists for participating in this debate. Good night and goodbye.